So good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to this important webinar focused on transitions to civilian life for children and young people from armed forces families. Thank you so much for joining us today. Whether you're working in education, health, social care, the armed forces sector, or simply interested in improving the support to those that we offer to young people, we're really glad to have you with us. So my name is Meg Thomas. I am Deputy CEO and Policy Lead here at Forces Children Scotland, and I'll be acting as your chair today. So today we'll be exploring a topic that's often overlooked in the wider conversation about armed forces service and veterans transitions, and that is the experience of young people. So when a serving parent leaves the armed forces, the family doesn't just move into civilian life, they often move into uncharted territory. And for the children and young people that we have spoken to, and for those involved, that journey can be both life-shaping and life-disrupting. So let's begin by setting the scene. Why does this topic matter so much? More than 14,000 people leave the services every year. We don't know how many family children are attached to those service personnel, but as families across the UK make that transition out of military life, it can mean leaving behind not just a job, but a home, a school, a network of friends, a lifestyle, and for many, a strong sense of identity. For children and young people, the experience is rarely straightforward. It can involve repeated moves, disrupted education, and loss of familiar routines and social networks. It can lead to a growing awareness of a shift in family dynamics, particularly if the parent is struggling with their own transition. We've heard young people describe this process as being caught in a tornado of change, and we'll hear more about that in a little bit. But we think that's fitting, that it's the name of one of the campaigns that we'll be discussing today. It's a term that perfectly captures the turbulence, the speed, and the disorientation that many armed forces children experience during the transition. These young people are incredibly resilient, but we need to be really careful to make sure we're not mistaking resilience for invulnerability or not needing support. The emotional and psychological impact of this transition can be significant, and all too often these young people are left to navigate it without the targeted support they need. There's really good news. The recognition on this issue is growing. Through the Armed Forces Covenant and related policies across the UK, governments have committed to ensuring the Armed Forces families are not disadvantaged in accessing public services. Here in Scotland, the Scottish Veterans Commissioner, Susie Hamilton, who's joined our call today and will be speaking shortly, has carried out important work highlighting the need to focus not just on the individual service leaver, but on the whole family. Her report placed real emphasis on the better integration between services, education, health, housing, so that families and especially young people don't fall through the cracks in transition. We've also been really fortunate to have FIMT fund some research into the experience of children and young people transitioning to veteran status and the impact on their identity. And we are really proud partners along with Brunel University Access and Portsmouth University to deliver that research over the next 18 months to 2 years, and we will definitely be keeping you updated on that. But policy and research is not enough. It has to be translated into practice, into people, and into projects that actively support young people in meaningful ways. So that's where today's session comes in. We'll be shining a light on some of the brilliant and aspiring work that's taking place in Scotland and young people during this transition. So you'll hear more about what it means to transition from armed forces to civilian life, how this experience uniquely affects children compared to their parents, and we'll discuss some of the key challenges and emotional impacts. The Tornado of Change campaign, which elevates the voice of young people themselves, giving them a platform to share how it really feels to go through this change and what support they wish they'd have. We'll talk to you about that. We'll hear from our Ruby Boots, a project coordinator. Ruby Boots is a project which provides trauma-informed creative and emotional literacy support to young people making the transition. And we aim to use art, expression, and storytelling to help children make sense of the change and build emotional strength. And of course, insights from the latest reports from Susie as Scottish Veterans Commissioner, which sets out a vision for the more holistic, family-centred transition support, recognising that when we help young people, we strengthen the whole family's ability to thrive. So we're incredibly lucky to have a fantastic panel with us today who'll share insights from their work, research, and personal journeys. So can I introduce them briefly to you? We'll hear first from Judith Blair, who is the Learning and Development Worker here at Forces Children Scotland. Judith is a trained primary school teacher, a Forces wife and mum to two primary school aged children. And while she hasn't yet done this transition to civilian life because her husband is still serving, it is something that she is acutely aware of through her work in developing our community, our sessions like today and our other offers for our community, continuing professional development offers. We will hear from Nina, our Children and Young People's Participation Manager. We are working on that title because it's a mouthful. But Nina will talk us through just that experience of Tornado of Change. Nina brings a wealth of experience to the role, having trained as a sick children's nurse before moving into young carers participation work. And then thankfully, we've been able to secure her skill and passion for several years now, and hopefully several years to come. No pressure, Nina. We'll hear from Heather. So Heather Douglas is our Ruby Boots project coordinator. Heather is a Forces child herself and made the transition to civilians life at a really tricky time of early teenage years and early high school. So we'll hear from Heather about some of her own personal experience, but also the offer Ruby Boots have. And last but definitely not least, we'll hear from Susie Hamilton, who is the Scottish Veterans Commissioner. Susie served for many years herself before making that transition into veteran status, worked in a number of public sector jobs before becoming commissioner, and was delighted to hear, Susie, that you recently had your term extended. So really looking forward to hearing what else you're going to bring to that role. So as we begin, here's what we hope you'll take away from today. So a deeper understanding of what transition feels like for children and young people, practical ideas and models of support that can be applied to your own school, work, services and communities, a sense of shared purpose, because when we work together across sectors, we can make a real change for this group of young people. So Jude has helpfully written some notes for me that you'll have guessed that I'm reading, but she's put a real call to action in here that I'm going to quote directly. So let's commit to not just listening, but responding, to not just acknowledging these experiences, but doing something with what we've learnt today. So we'll be using the question and answer feature throughout today. So feel free to post your questions at any time and we'll bring them into the discussion later. We've allowed lots of time for questions at the end. We are recording this session and we'll share the link and resources with you afterwards. And just a reminder that we want to keep this space open and respectful. People will no doubtedly share from their lived experience. So we're just asking you to engage thoughtfully and constructively and just think about how hard it can be to talk about those things sometimes and make sure we're respectful in our questions and answers. So thank you again for being here, for caring so much about this group of young people. And I am going to start with the first question for Judith. So Jude, to begin our discussion today, what exactly do we mean by transitioning from armed forces life to civilian life? And how does this experience uniquely affect children compared to their parents? What are the key challenges and emotional impacts we see?
Thank you very much, Meg. And it's really great to be here today to talk about this really important conversation. Before we get into the detail, I think it's worth pausing just to recognise something that sometimes gets forgotten in conversations about armed forces families, and that armed forces children and young people are remarkable. So they grow up with extraordinary life experiences and they often learn adaptability, cultural awareness and emotional intelligence earlier than many of their peers. And they know how to walk into a new classroom and make friends quickly, because sometimes they've had to do that half a dozen times before the age of 12. And they know how to adjust to new homes and new routines, often every couple of years, and they carry immense pride in their parent service and in their military identity too. And that links directly to the Forces Children's Rights Charter, which tells us that children's armed forces life and identity should always be respected and supported. And their background is not a disadvantage, it's part of who they are. And when we value it, they thrive. But today we're going to look at the other side of the story, the slightly more challenging side, the experience of transitioning from armed forces life to civilian life. And here, children and young people face unique challenges that are sometimes invisible to the outside world and quite different to those their parents experience. So first of all, what do we mean by transition? So transition can mean different things. Some people describe it as becoming a veteran. Others say it's leaving active service. Some families prefer the phrase moving to civilian life. And something really important to raise here is that many young people view the term veteran, not all, but some view the term veteran as not sitting well with them. It can feel heavy or carry stigma, and civilian life feels closer to what they are experiencing. So that in itself is significant because it shows how children need the space to shape their own understanding of this transition. And again, just linking back to the Charter's principle of children's voices being heard and respected really matters. It's not just about adults making decisions and children adjusting. It's about listening carefully to how young people themselves describe these experiences and respecting their language, their perspectives, and their emotions. And transition just isn't about a job ending, it's about a lifestyle completely shifting emotionally, socially, practically, and culturally. And while military families go through many transitions, like moving house, changing schools, deployments, the final one, the step out of military life altogether, is by far one of the biggest. So when we think about what shapes this experience, every family's journey is different. Some transitions are planned, like retirement after many years of service. Others are sudden through medical discharge or injury. And in the hardest situations, families face transition because of bereavement and the loss of a serving parent. And if you think a moment about the different experiences that this creates for a child, a planned retirement might come with months to prepare, to say goodbyes, to think ahead. A medical discharge can turn life upside down overnight with new worries about health and income. And bereavement creates a grief that overshadows everything else. And again, this is where the Charter's principle of family life being protected and supported becomes central. Whatever the reason for the transition, children deserve stability, care, and the reassurance that their family will be helped through it. And no child should be left to carry that uncertainty on their own. And yet, despite how significant this is, there is very little formal guidance aimed at children and young people. And that gap undermines another vital right, that the right to be supported through change. And if transition is one of the biggest changes a Forces child will ever experience, then support should not be optional. It should be built into the system, as I said at the start in the call to action, Nick. And there are practical challenges, and I would say one of the biggest practical challenges to start off with is housing. So families living in service family accommodation often have to leave when the serving parent leaves the forces. Suddenly, they are navigating private renting, mortgages, utility bills, and council tax for the first time. And from a child's perspective, though it isn't about paperwork, it's about losing the bedroom where they felt safe. It's about leaving behind the neighbours who understood their lifestyle. And it's about saying goodbye to a street full of other children who also knew what it was like to have a parent deployed. And for some, it's the third, fourth, or even fifth move of their childhood. And again, that links us back to the Charter, the principle that education should help every child be their best self now and in the future. So schooling can also be disrupted. by these moves. So housing and education is only one part of the challenge. Another is the loss of community. Military life comes with a built-in support network, so people look out for one another. Parents understand each other's pressures. Children know that the boy or girl living next door has also had to say goodbye to a parent heading to deployment. And leaving the forces often means leaving that behind. Suddenly, families are in civilian neighbourhoods where often no one shares that background. Young people have told us that this feels like being cut adrift, that they're losing their second family. And how does this uniquely affect children? So it's important to recognise the difference between the serving parent and the child. The parent chose to join, they chose to join the armed forces. It was their decision, but children were born into it. They never got to choose. And for them, the military way of life, the moves, the deployments, the friendships made and lost is all they have ever known. So when transition comes, it's not just the end of a job. It can feel like the loss of an entire culture and way of life. And that's why their armed forces identity must be respected, and it really matters. And the young people, through our participation work, the young people we've actually spoke to, they've actually described the transition in 3 parts, before, during, and after. And in the before phase, they talk about it often being filled with anxiety and uncertainty. Will they have to move house? What school will they go to? Will they lose their friends? And for some, this anticipation feels like a cloud hanging over them for months. And then there's the during phase. So this is the moment of upheaval. Everything is in flux. The parent may be stressed, paperwork piles up, family routines are disrupted, and children often feel powerless. The phase tests the right for family life to be protected and the right to be supported through change. And if those rights are not upheld, young people can feel abandoned in the middle of the process. And finally, after, this is when the dust settles, but a whole new set of challenges begins. So children are now in new schools and communities that may not understand them, and they're trying to build new peer groups. And again, this is where the right to inclusion and the right to an education that allows them to thrive becomes essential. And as discussed, children can feel this loss of pride or identity, and some young people say that being a part of an armed forces family was a huge part of who they were. And when that ends, they don't always know how to define themselves. And all this happens at the same time their parents are adjusting to maybe looking for work, dealing with their own mental health, or trying to figure out how to settle the family into a brand new place. And just to end on, one of the most striking things is how under-researched this area is. The Living in Our Shoes report made it very clear that while we spent years understanding what the transition process is like for the serving person, we know far less about how it affects young children and young people. And that's a problem, because without that understanding, how can we offer the right support? And the truth is, the entire family transition's not just the one in uniform. And we need to move towards a better understanding of transition that includes the emotional, practical, and identity-based impacts on children and young people. So I hope that answered some of your question, Meg.
Jude, I was struck by a couple of things in there. One is, we know that actually in order to realise children's rights, we need to understand the data first. And we don't know how many young people there are in this situation across Scotland and across the UK. I was also struck that when we launched out the Children's Rights Charter, one of the young people spoke about her own experiences of transitioning so eloquently. And actually a couple of things in the things she spoke about really struck me. One was this sense for her of, she'd had lots of moves up until this move, but up until her dad left the forces, she could have gone back to all of those childhood places where she had lived, and she could still visit because she could go behind the wire. But as he left, those were cut off for him. And that sense of identity for her about that, we all have a shared childhood history. I had dinner last week with a girl I hadn't seen in 36 years, but I'd gone to high school with. that shared identity of childhood is a really important thing, and we don't necessarily think about how cut off we were. The other thing that struck me about what she was talking about was that sense of safety. So one of the things that are in the charter is about that I'm safe where I live and play. And she definitely described that bit about living behind the wire, feeling incredibly safe. And then that sense of security and safety taken away when her dad left and she experienced community out with that, where there wasn't a shared value and things like that. So I guess that's a very long-winded way to ask a question about, like, how does this differ from typical childhood moves, or even the moves that children have experienced within Force's life? Because you say they're really adaptable. They've learned how to walk into new classrooms and things like that. But so, and you've already touched on that, but I wondered if you wanted to tell us a little bit about Max's big move and some of the things that we're exploring in that.
Yeah, so Maxie's big move really emerged from trying to just inform the communities that the children are moving into about this experience. So Maxie's big move, for context, is a picture book that has been co-produced with the young people, which follows a little boy who's moving into a new community. And it's a book helped to educate peers and teachers and professionals about what that transition is like. And it is interesting you're saying how it's different. It goes back to what I said in my answer about that sense of belonging, that community, that camaraderie. And it does feel very strange when you live. I mean, we haven't left the Forces, but we're not on a patch, and we're not around any Forces families. And it almost feels like a sense of loss, because you know that you can just go next door and ask for anything and they'll get it, like a toilet roll. That's all. We always forget when we used to move, and it can leave you feeling quite empty. And when you do think about your childhood, if you have had experiences of always being in that kind of community where that there's that bubble of support, it can leave an emptiness in you in a way. So it's just trying to look at ways to try and educate the communities that these children and young people that are coming into, that they have that awareness, so that it makes support easier for them.
Great, thanks, Jude. And I think that leads really nicely and naturally into Nina, who will talk to us a little bit about what children and young people have told us help them during this process. Because I think, we our values at Forces Children Scotland are very much about we will be led by the children, young people's experience, and we will not impose solutions on them, but we work with them to find those solutions because we know they are the best solutions. So Nina, Lou, I have just seen your comment. We haven't launched it yet, Lou. You haven't seen it because it's going to go live soon, and I promise that you will see it the moment it is live. We're getting some printed copies as well as hopefully some e-copies, so we'll get them out to the network as soon as we can. So Nina, can I pose a question to you? So Forces Children Scotland launched the Tornado of Change campaign in May 2023 to highlight the experience of armed forces children. Can you tell us about the campaign, what inspired it, what key messages emerged, and how it changed the conversation around armed forces children's needs, particularly those transitioning to veteran status? And what current projects are Forces Children Scotland involved in to support this transition?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. As Jude said, everyone's experience is different and it varies on their own individual circumstances. But during the course of the work that we did on the campaign, children and young people told us that nobody was talking about this huge transition. It wasn't because people didn't care or they didn't want to support them, but it was simply because the challenges they face just weren't recognised at that time. The focus was on supporting, as Jude said, supporting the serving person with that transition. And although families were mentioned, it was only really in the passing. Nobody was truly considering children and young people in their own right or taking their specific needs into account. Young people had described during our sessions that we deliver in schools in key areas about that experience for them. They talked about losing the tight-knit Forces community, as Jude's talked about, where families understood their unique experiences and challenges. We had a support network. There was a youth club on the patch where they knew their neighbours, where there'd be a welcome with a cake. Heard a lot from young people about a welcome with a cake when you moved in. And one young person described to me like her sense of loss when moving into a civilian house, and this didn't happen. And she was quite shocked. You know, nobody was welcoming her into her new house when they moved into their civilian house. And she just didn't expect that, and hadn't actually thought about how different it would be to move and it not be moving on the patch. As we've mentioned earlier, they talked about the loss of identity, with a young person directly saying to me, being a forces child was all that they ever knew. They spoke about uncertainty around their parents, so knowing and hearing kind of snatched conversations in the house around new employment, what the employment would be, and the impact on the whole family of this. During those sessions, young people also shared about their experience of having their serving parent at home more. So yes, wonderful that their parent was there, no longer deploying, no longer weekending potentially, or working long hours. And actually the whole family needing to adjust to that because they were used to that. That was their life. And young people telling us that actually that's hard. And nobody saying that it was okay, nobody reassuring that it was okay to find it difficult that their serving parent was there more often. And that adjustments takes time, and it's okay to actually say that that's the case. They talked about having itchy feet for another move that wasn't going to come anytime soon, because that had been their life. They'd maybe moved, 8 or so times, and then suddenly realising, this is it, we're staying here. What do you mean? Because actually, although moving is tricky sometimes, it's also exciting. Like reinventing yourself when you move is great, So I suppose in all of that, having, young people really valued the opportunity to talk about these experiences that nobody had really asked them about before. They also told us that professionals didn't understand the massive changes they went through. They didn't understand about their identity as a forces child and the acute loss they felt when this changed. And it's not that they're not a forces child anymore, they'll always be a forces child. It's just, I suppose the key thing that stood out to me was a young person telling me that when she was at primary school, it was really well known about her identity as a forces child. Both her parents served, and her primary school were well aware of that and supported her really well when parents were deployed. And when dad became a veteran first, and then mum was later on, and she was still at primary school at that time. And that was fine. They had an understanding. They knew her background. They knew her history, and understood that being in a forces family shaped who she was as a young person. She then moved up to high school, and that was lost in transit. They were in a civilian family at that time. And actually, that's where that young person found it really, really difficult, because nobody really understood her forces identity. So for me, that really stood out in terms of, just because your parent no longer serves doesn't mean to say you've not had that history, and that's no longer your life. So a little bit about how the Tornado of Change campaign came about. So having listened to young people, it's not enough to just listen to them, obviously. We needed to think about what young people were telling us. They told us it's not enough just for us to listen. We need to do something about it, of course. I'm a member of the Paul Hamlin Trust Youth Fund Learning Network. That's a bit of a mouthful. Anyway, they host online sessions for sharing of best practice in the youth work services that they have funded currently or have funded in the past. So it's lovely that actually, just because we don't currently have funding, we still have access to connect with other projects across the country. And during one of these sessions, I met someone from a charity called Effervescent, who which was a creative agency based in England. We had a chat about the work that they do. They told me a little bit about a co-created campaign called Lonely Not Alone that they just finished working on, and I was really impressed and thought it was amazing work and how wonderful it would be to work with them on a campaign. So because young people had told us their teachers, parents and their peers didn't really understand their experience, they wanted that to change. We were very fortunate to get funding to work with Effervescent, and we did well, a whole week of a residential. Not going to lie, it was a tough one, but a wonderful, wonderful experience in working on this campaign with a group of fantastic young people. So over the course of the week, we did creative sessions with Effervescent, and young people described landing in civilian life being like Dorothy's arrival in Wizard of Oz, suddenly in a strange and unfamiliar world. And hence the Tornado of Change campaign came about. And Jude, I think you're about to show the one of the films that was created with young people.
Yeah, it's just loading up, so hopefully the sound will work.
Oh. Oh.
I'll just pause it there, Nina. There are two other clips as well, but if we've got time, we'll show them later.
Yeah, there's a bit of a blip in that one. But anyway, I hope you get the gist of it. Yeah, so we have a Tornado of Change campaign landing page, and I think Jude, when she gets a second, is going to pop up that link for me. Thanks, Jude. Just but just kind of highlighting, there's lots of top tips for professionals that were developed during the project. And we're just going to highlight a couple of things. So there's information for young people, there's tips for professionals. But I think the kind of key things is around, for me, kind of pulling out what young people have been telling us is like, actually, them understanding that whether or not that you have experienced that or that you're connected particularly to the military, it's really about letting young people know that you've researched about what this transition is, and you coming along to this session is amazing, so that you have a bit of an understanding about other young people's experiences when their parents left, and acknowledge that their family transition will be different, and that you're keen to hear about their experiences. So young people definitely saying actually an opportunity to talk about their experiences, but knowing that you have a background understanding was really, really important to young people. And around supporting the young people to be and feel empowered by focusing on their strength and ability. So like Jude was talking about early, around actually those strengths that come from being in a forces family, and talking about how that can support them through this next change, and also obviously identifying their current needs and supporting with them with whatever those needs are. So yeah, I hope, Meg, that's a little bit, and sorry if I've gone on, because I could talk about this all day, but anyway, tell me to shush.
Excellent, Nina. I think, again, a couple of things striking me in there when you talked about that young person who moved to high school having been in a civilian family, but actually what we know is some of those building blocks from early primary school, like maths that builds on things, if they're missing that and a school doesn't understand that forces life, it could have huge repercussions for their ongoing attainment and achievement. And I know the young people are really clear that we don't want to just be thought about in terms of their attainment and achievement, but that's a really key example about why it's important that we understand that forces history for children, not just the immediate, if this is a transition that's just happened. The other thing, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one, Nina, because it's not a question that's written down. Sorry, you can give me into trouble later.
Okay.
But actually, I'm really struck for those young people, children and young people who have dual serving parents. We really don't understand, do we? What are the implications about one of them transitioning to veteran status and then them having this dual identity of still serving with one parent but veteran with the other, and potentially why that transition has had. We've heard lots, particularly about women who leave the forces when their families, raising families, because it's just not conducive to family life in that dual serving thing. But there must be a huge loss and grief from those parents. I just don't know if there's anything you wanted to sort of share about. I know we support some young people in that really unique circumstances, and whether there's something you want to share.
Yeah, certainly. I think it is. They've got a foot in two camps, basically, and I think for some young people that I've spoken to, they're particularly depending on the role that their parent, primarily their mother, does it in service, although with that other young person it was round the other way. It may be that actually when they're very young, then serving life doesn't suit the family life, and they'll maybe leave then. For other, I'm particularly struck, and it maybe doesn't answer this question, but I think it adds a little bit of an element, Meg. But one young person I met a long time ago it was his mum that served. She had actually left the service when he was quite young, but then was a reservist, but actually was quite a specialist role. He didn't quite know what that role was, as we find often with children are like, I'm not quite sure what they do. But actually, as a reservist, she was called up quite often. So although he was classed as being in a veteran family, if you like, thankfully his school invited him along, and obviously we work with young people from reservist families as well. But actually, she deployed quite a lot, and I think that's another element that quite often when people leave the service, they'll potentially sign up as a reservist as well. So I think there's so many different elements, so many unique elements for young people. And I think there's not enough that we probably know in the sector around that dual serving and that experience when one parent leaves the service.
I think you're also highlighting there, Nina, that we probably don't know enough about reservists leaving service as well. And we wouldn't necessarily refer to them as veterans, but I was struck. My brother is a reservist and has been for more than 30 years. And when I was home in Australia, having not been home in 10 years. Actually, he was deployed while I was home, which made it really tricky to see him. And I've never really thought about those implications around after 30 years and he leaves. What will that mean for his identity, but more particularly for his children's identity? So I think that's, you're highlighting another area that we just don't know enough about. I just wonder if you could really quickly tell me a little bit about the FIMT project that that I alluded to, but also a little bit more about Max's big move. And then Lou, I have seen your bit, so we'll come to you in a sec, but if we could just do this, and then we've got a brief window that you can come in on, Lou.
Yeah, so Forces in Mind Trust which is FIMT, because we say FIMT all the time. So Forces in Mind Trust has commissioned research into the experience of children and young people when the parent leaves the service. That research is underpinned by 3 key questions. What are the experience of children and young people before, during and after their parents leave the armed forces? What are their unique opportunities and challenges associated with transition from the armed forces community and the impact on children and young people? And finally, how can support be most effectively organised and implemented for these children and young people before, after, during and after transition? So Brunel and University of Portsmouth, as Meg said earlier, will lead the research, and they'll be working with ourselves, we're so excited about this piece of work. We will support a youth advisory board to ensure that the voice of children and young people are central in shaping how this research is designed and conducted. So over the course of all the research project, we'll be meeting with young people online, and the recruitment for that will be across the UK. And we're just at the process at the moment around ethics for the research project, but really excited to be involved in this work. I think that's.
And a little bit about Max's big
Max's big move. Sorry, yes. Okay, so Max's big move. So excited about this as well, but we're not quite ready, Lou, to send out copies. But so the idea for Max's big move came with the Ruby Boots project, which Heather is going to tell you more about in a moment. But we were doing a primary school assembly to raise awareness about the project. We'd taken the insights from the Tornado of Change campaign and shaped them into like a composite story about different experiences, particularly for younger school and primary school, younger children in primary school. And we were delivering it as a whole school assembly. And the aim of the session was raise awareness and kind of identify young people to help children self-identify, because quite often schools don't know whose parents are leaving the forces, you know. So the whole aim of the story was to kind of prompt that self-identification for referral to the project. Alongside that was raising awareness with the teachers in the school. And that session went down really, really well. The children loved it. From there, we took the story, Jude took the story and we reshaped it a bit, and we commissioned an illustrator to bring that story to life as a children's book. In the book, Max's mum leaves the army due to an injury. He moves out of service family accommodation to a new house and into a new school. And the illustrator, who's wonderful, worked really closely with young people from the Lookers area to ensure that the illustration really captured the authentic look and feel of the forces life. So she did a lot of work with the young people around just their experiences of forces life. So she had a really good in-depth understanding of that. The finished storybook will be a tool for professionals to start meaningful conversations. It will have little mini activities to explore together, and will also have helpful research links for practitioners. Just kind of a nod to the illustrator's work in terms of she captured like service family accommodation beautifully in the book, and just some nods to the differences in you know, the new house that Max moves into that has wallpaper up in the background, you know. So I think she did a really good job and really listened.
And not horrific
beautifully.
army curtains.
Yeah, no MOD curtains at
Magnolia
all.
walls.
So
Yeah,
excited to read this week that the movement on housing and people allowing to be personalised and have pets and things becoming a lot easier. So that's exciting, an exciting shift that I know many of the young people will be really excited to see. Thanks for that, Nina. My timekeeper in the background is telling me that I'm not chairing this very well and I'm actually running late. Lou, if you don't mind, because otherwise I'll get into lots of trouble from Jude, can we just hold the bit that you want to talk about to the end while we move on to Susie and the questions we have for Susie's. And Jude, I promise to manage my timekeeping a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Hi, Susie. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Welcome. Really excited to hear the news that you've had your term extended and really excited to see what will come of that. But we really wanted to talk to you today about your report, Anything But Uniform, Community and Relationships. I think the intention is we're going to start by watching Sophia's story, so the animation that you captured so beautifully in that report, and then I'll come back to you with the questions. I think Jude is just teeing that video up for us.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Okay, I'm just bringing that up for you just now. Okay.
It doesn't seem to be playing my video.
Are you not seeing that, Susie?
No.
No, Ali's just said the same thing, so I am. So I'm not sure what's happening. Jude, if we just pause it for now.
Okay, so some people are getting it.
Apologies to those who weren't able to see that. I'll put, as Meg said, I'll put the link in the chat for you.
Yeah, thanks. So, Susie, can I ask you about that report, Community and Relationships, Anything But Uniform? I greatly enjoyed reading. I think you brought it out just as I came in to post and I found it so interesting. So it provides really crucial insights into veterans' experience in Scotland. Can I ask you what specific findings emerged about children going through this transition process and what surprised you most about their experiences? And can I say, really pleased that you took the time to listen to them, because as we've heard, often they're not considered as part of this transition.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Apologies to anyone who couldn't see that that video there. It's on my website in the report, so that it'll be available afterwards. Yeah, so I called it Anything But Uniform because I was really I really wanted to look at the wider, more diverse veterans and armed forces community, and particularly for me, the veterans community, and that included, of course, children or young people of veterans. And I think we've heard already a really good articulation of the kind of issues, directly from Sophia, and that was Sophia's actual voice that we heard there, with an animation added to go along to it, as well as your team, Jude and Nina, talking about the main issues that they encountered, but also, the very positive aspects of being a military child. And, they're definitely, there are, and I heard that a lot from the young people I heard from. Excuse me. I waited until it's my turn to talk to start coughing.
Always.
I suppose from my point of view, obviously I'm interested in devolved public services for veterans, so that, there definitely are some gaps there. One is that there is some very good support around for military children, and I'm glad that Lou Kinnear is on the call here, because I think the Highland Council's military liaison group is an excellent example of some of the good support, but it's very consistent across the country. And there are military children, and particularly veterans children, in every single school, I would say, across the country, or certainly senior school across the country, and they are counted. They are that's part of the data that's collected by the Scottish Government for serving people and veterans children. Of course, not everyone necessarily identifies them, but I certainly heard from some of the young people that, particularly when they change school, that their new teachers, if they're in an area which didn't have a military base or a lot of military people, that they didn't feel understood at all. And they were undergoing all those feelings of loss and change of identity, and didn't feel that there was really anyone listening to that. So I think that inconsistency is something that needs to be addressed. And then I think particularly as well, and I've heard this from other organisations who support military young people, is kind of mid school year, midterm moves. So particularly with unplanned transitions. So moving education systems in particular. So if they've been serving south of the border and then come home to Scotland mid-school year and then find themselves in a different education system, that definitely can cause difficulties. And it's really exacerbated if there's additional support needs involved as well. So the length of time it can take for assessments, for example. So that's, and again, that would happen to anyone who's moving schools mid-term, mid-academic year. But if it's a transitioning family, they're also dealing with all the other things that we've heard about, the complete change of lifestyle and friends and new housing and all the rest of it. So doing all that at once, it's not something you would necessarily always plan to do all at once. To have get a new job, new home, move your children to school, and do all that all at once. So it's something that should be taken into account. And there isn't always that awareness there. It was really helpful for me to hear directly from the Forces Children Scotland young people. So I had a really good session with them, really good listening session with them, and I was just struck, first of all, by just what fantastic young people they were, and very articulate, and were really, they expressed what they were thinking and feeling really well. Now I don't know if that's just because they've been getting so much support already, and which made them better able to articulate what they were feeling. But certainly it was really helpful for me to hear from them directly. So I think, and how that would translate into policy changes, I think it's really about making sure that the voice of military and transitioning young people is really included in policy development, and that's really the government's remit. So the government provides that guidance, leadership, and advice, and in policy development. And it's not just in education. Actually, I think that's also has to be considered in housing, health, and social care as well. So that's obviously mainly in our local authorities and also our health boards, and having staff who are generally veteran aware just helps with all of that. So our local authorities do have champions, our health boards have champions, but it's also being able to get the message out more to more frontline staff, and to provide it's not huge amounts of intensive training. It's really just awareness, so that there's more of that recognition in the community.
I think that's a really valid point, isn't it, Susie? So we've got the Armed Forces Covenant that obviously says that no veteran or their family should be disadvantaged, but we hear very frequently from families that actually the serving parent or the veteran doesn't feel disadvantaged, but that sometimes those people at the ground front don't understand that extends to families, and more difficultly, don't understand to families who may have separated post leaving the services, which we know is far too common, unfortunately, because of all of the stresses that come. What do you think we can do to strengthen that sort of ability to apply the Armed Forces Covenant in that setting, but particularly to children and young people, and help them understand? I know Lou has done some amazing work about education and the Armed Forces Covenant, but more generally.
Yeah. I mean, they absolutely use the resources that are there, and the resources developed by Highland are great. There's also the Forces Children Education have some great resources there as well. So that's a really helpful kind of source of support. And the Covenant kind of guidance itself has some good examples and links to training. So some of the training around the Covenant has been developed by, I think it's Warwickshire Council, but most of it would apply in Scotland. There might be one or two slight differences in terminology and things like that. So it is about raising awareness and a bit of training and education, really. So more about education. And I think we mustn't forget the role of the third sector in this. I think that's really important. And I'm not just saying this because I came from the third sector, but there is, there's a limit to what we would really expect from statutory services. They would do what's reasonable, but the third sector can add so much more, can add real value, and particularly in these connecting, maintaining links, supporting families to stay connected with either with their military roots or to connect with their new communities as well. And I think that's that policy can do so much, but in the end, it's really people that make the difference. I think it's really important to remember that it's always going to be personal contact and teachers that understand, that social services staff who understand, that's what's going to make the difference rather than policy. But policy is needed as well, of course.
Yes.
And I think also there's a role for peer support there, and again that's something that can be really well supported by the third sector. Young people supporting each other, families supporting each other. We've seen that it's really, really effective right across the armed forces community in all sorts of different areas, where peer support seems to make more of a difference than sometimes something that's been brought in as statutory support. It really is. It's the golden key, I think, sometimes to getting through to the armed forces community.
Yeah, really, really excellent points there. Do you think, Susie, there's a bit of a difference between the Scottish children's experience compared to sort of wider UK? Or, I mean, you've alluded to that somewhere with the Warwickshire training, but what do you think the differences might be?
I think in the general, the experience transition, I think is pretty similar. I think it depends, again, where you are in Scotland. As I said, there's some inconsistencies. If you're lucky enough to be, maybe in Highland or in Murray, where there's some work, or now Midlothian have now started doing some work specifically with military children. But you could be somewhere else, and I'm sure some people on the call are from other parts of Scotland, somewhere where the community is maybe more geographically dispersed as well. So they might have, children may well have fewer peers who understand their situation. Maybe that could lead to more feelings of isolation. I guess on the plus side, Scotland has that focus of getting it right for every child. So they have that policy framework, which is about inclusive wellbeing, and that should, that should be a positive difference for young people in Scotland.
I think you raise a really valid point, though, Susie, with the housing strategy and the encouragement by the MOD for more and more serving families to buy their own property. The more and more families are making that decision to week end, actually the experience of transitioning to veteran status will look very different for the next generation of children than the ones who've come before, who've grown, that more traditional one we've talked about, growing up on a patch and then moving off a patch. And how do you think we need to think about that from a services perspective to sort of future plan for those transitions looking really different?
Yes, and I think, and again, this reflects across the whole armed forces community, is there's less connection with the general community and the armed forces, because our armed forces are smaller at the moment. That is something I suspect is going to change, and I think the political situation, sadly globally, may lead to some changes there. But I absolutely believe that prevention is much better than trying to treat symptoms. So preparation by using resources, by really including all members of the armed forces community in policy development is where it starts, and being able to have that in place before perhaps more military children are moving into an area or transitioning, or there's a base closes and people get dispersed, which does happen, or they expand, as is happening at the moment in Helensburgh and in Lossiemouth. Having that in place first is the sort of prevention approach, and I think that's probably the key to it.
Thank you, Susie, very much, especially seeing some of those questions were not scripted and you didn't have in advance. So thank you for that. We're going to move on to Heather just now. We will come back to all of our panelists to answer questions afterwards. So if you've got questions to Susie, keep them to the end. I think Jude's just spotlighting Heather for us just now. So Heather, thank you very much for joining us today. Just hold on a second. My teenage girl has not got the memo that says don't come in and disturb me. Hopefully the shut door will make that memo quite clear, or maybe loudly talking about it. She's heard through the door. Sorry. So Heather, hi, welcome.
Hi, Meg.
Heather, the Ruby Boots project represents another important initiative to support children and young people who transition to civilian life. I heard lots from Nina when I first started that as we were doing the tornado of change, the young people kept saying, but we want a service. We kept saying, but we need to do a campaign. They said, but we want a service. But we need to do a campaign, but we want a service. And that's where Ruby Boots came from. And I think that's always the best places for services to come from, out of what young people have told us will work. So can you explain what this project involves and how it supports children through the transition, but also as someone who's had your own lived experience of being a forces child and transitioning to veteran status, we wondered if you would share a little bit of your own journey and how that's helped you deliver the project of Ruby Boots so successfully.
Yeah. Absolutely, yes. And I'll start with Ruby Boots because that's the more important part, and then come back to little old me. But it's really, really good to be talking about Ruby Boots. I'm very passionate about what it is. I think, first of all, it's really great that Susie spoke about the effectiveness of peer support and how much value there is behind that. And I think something that's really important, first of all, is to remember that the whole family serves and the whole family leads. It's not just the serving person and the spouse as well that goes through this. It's also everyone else in the home, maybe even down to the wee dogs. And talking about the Tornado of Change campaign that Nina so wonderfully explained and talked to us about, the young people during that campaign said 4 things repeatedly that they were feeling during that transition to civilian life. They were feeling isolated, lonely, confused, and that changes were really abrupt. And what they needed was a service. And together they co-designed Ruby Boots. So Ruby, if you kind of maybe already picked up on the Wizard of Oz part there, Ruby because of Dorothy's slippers during that tornado in the Wizard of Oz scene, that is how young people felt. So we've taken, well, the young people took Ruby from Dorothy, and Boots because all tri-services wear boots, but also representing kind of that stability that Boots may represent. So Ruby Boots is a peer support. Jude, I don't know if you have those 3 circles. It's just there in case I explain it really badly, really. So there's 3 elements of Ruby Boots. Yes, thank you so much. So we have the buddies who are the veteran's child or children. They get trained up on different skills such as decision making and active listening, problem solving, and they're fully fledged volunteers. So for the slightly older one, that's really good for their professional development and things like that. We have the peers, who are the children and young people who are transitioning to Civvy Street or maybe have literally just gone through it. Then we also have wonderful, wonderful adult volunteer facilitators who I could not do Ruby Boots without. They are amazing. And they are trained up and, of course, background checked and everything to really help facilitate these sessions, also to help safeguard and things like that. So yes, it's been designed by children and young people, and it's in a group setting where they are matched in similar developmental stages. There's no point putting an 8-year-old with a 17-year-old. Make sure that they can actually relate to one another. And the groups are a mix of activities and discussions to better understand what happens during the transition, but as well as understanding their own well-being and understanding what their family might be experiencing, and then also the practical support for specific needs within that group. So sessions are flexible and creative to the specific needs of that group as well. And then as well as that, we also do some assemblies and workshops to raise wider awareness of the specific challenges and needs of these children and young people, and creating resources, some of which are in the making. So I'm going to be mysterious and say keep your eyes peeled for some for some new resources. And another thing that's really important is measuring success as well. Make sure that what we're doing isn't blind, we're following what's right. So continuously gathering evidence from the young people as to what's right, what could be improved, and as well as measuring kind of levels of mood, willingness to socialize with others, level of enjoyment, self-efficacy, as well as that confidence to overcome challenges and things like that. So we look at this pre and post service, as well as midpoint one-to-one check-ins. And I also really value the relationships I have with parents as well. There's no point doing loads of work with the young people and ignoring the parents. The family as a whole is really important. And lastly, I'll just quickly give some feedback. I'm giving a whistle-stop tour, Meg. I hope I'm catching up some of your time. So over the summer, we just did a 6-week program. I will say 6 weeks is very short, especially with summer holidays. I was really jealous of some of the holidays that some of our young people were going on. So within that 6 weeks, we achieved lots, and it was so wonderful. But just to give some feedback from that, because it's the most recent one, 100% of them said that they learned new ways to support friends and family, which is so awesome and wonderful. 100% also said that they would recommend the sessions to a friend and would also want to continue once we're back at school. So we've really established those communities. And then 72.7%, to be specific, learned something new about themselves. So in only 6 weeks, and for a lot of them, it was on average about 4 weeks because of holidays, which is quite right. But 3/4 of them learned something new. So for buddies, someone reported that they found out that they're good at helping people feel better, which is so wonderful. Someone said that they learned that they're not alone. Someone said they learned that it's good to not bottle up your feelings. And someone actually said that they're sad to leave the army. So before Ruby Boots, they hadn't actually identified what they felt. And in identifying it, we can then tackle it. So that was really good. And I think Nina touched on Forces identity, forgive me if it was someone else, and possibly Jude, someone wonderful mentioned Forces identity, and something that one of our young people said was, it means to me finding and exploring about what it means to be a civvy, since my dad was in the army since I was born. And I think this is really important to understand, because for a lot of service people, unless they were a Forces child or different circumstances, many of them are going from civilian to Forces to civilian, but the children and young people are going from military to civilian. They've not experienced anything else. So it's really a very new thing for them. I also asked why bespoke support is important for this transition to civilian life. And one person said, because you never know how children feel about leaving the army without asking them. You can never assume. There's this big idea that Forces children are always resilient, and actually that somewhat becomes harmful because we just assume that they're going to be okay. And another person said that it's important so we can understand what's happening, and that so the young person and us as professionals and educators can be prepared for what the young person is about to feel and experience. And lastly, parents' feedback, nice and quick and easy. They just spoke about how much of a relief it is for them to know that they can focus on all of the practical things, their own feelings about this big move, and that their children are being taken care of in a very specific and tailored way. Yes, I shall now move from my whistle-stop tour of Ruby Boots to a whistle-stop tour of me. So my dad served more than 20 years in the army, so I didn't know anything else. I moved post to post, so to date I have moved 16 times, which is quite a lot. And I went to 10 schools, and so dad left when I was about 13. So as Meg said at the beginning, it was those key teenage years. So it was a good time. I will say as well, I think Jude was going to pop a link in the chat if she hasn't already. There is, my dad and I actually wrote a blog together about the dual perspective of the transition from our side of it. So if you want to hear more than a whistle-stop tour, please do feel free to check that out. But in summary, the kind of key points was that, you know, moving was a constant state of transition. For our family, we relocated pretty much every 18 months. So I was constantly making new friends and absorbing different cultures, but there was an unspoken expectation to always be strong and to always cope. And that was really underlying everything. But so the same with all my friends, so I didn't think anything of it. Education was a battlefield of differences. So I think I've studied World War II about 5 times, but I've missed a lot of other things because curriculums don't align. I moved quite a lot of different places, lots of different curriculums. So if you want me on your pub quiz team, I'd consider it again, unless it's World War II. Also within the education system, especially around times like remembrance, triggers do lurk in unexpected corners of that school system and of the curriculum that unless teachers and peers have an understanding of forces life and experiences, they're not going to be able to manage. And I really struggled with the lack of order and different social dynamics in the comparison between civilian and military social situations and things like that. So I felt very much like a misfit. And because of it, there was definitely a hard time at school. Then moving forward, I'm just gonna, I'm aware I have some notes on my things. I can't actually see anyone. Oh, they're here, wonderful. I was about to prompt you, Jude. I couldn't actually see if they were up or not, wonderful. The next part as well, Jude, I don't know if you've already shown the one. I'm going to give a bit of a trigger warning because it's slightly upsetting if someone has any things about kind of cancer or ill health. But Dad left with the promise of stability and moving forward. Mom was going back to work, all of these wonderful things. And then a year later, he got a terminal cancer diagnosis. So intersectionality is really important to consider here. I was a forces child, also a young carer, and managing school, processing significant life changes, hormones, puberty, all of those wonderful things. But I really learned in this time that strength isn't about never feeling vulnerable, but about continuing forward despite challenges. And then in adulthood, where I am now, which is wonderful, it's definitely a continuing journey. My forces identity is still huge, probably why I love my job here so much, because it's still kind of verging on in that bubble a little bit. And yeah, we're all shaped by our experiences, defined by strength, but constantly bridging different worlds. And yeah, that's my whistle-stop tour.
Excellent. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for bridging so nicely those two bits around your professional self and your personal self. And actually, as you say, this job allows you to really nicely marry those two things together. I think you've not been long in the post. If there was one takeaway from you from Ruby Boots that everyone needs to think about, like one policy change or one thing that schools and communities could do better, what would it be? What's your magic wand moment?
I think there's definitely not enough awareness. It's quite difficult to identify who the children and young people are, because there's not enough conversations being had. And if more conversations were happening with the forces families about when you're leaving, what that's looking like, or you've just left, what does that look like for you in your situation? If those conversations were being had, it would be a lot easier to identify the families that are needing support, and then therefore be able to offer Ruby Boots. I know if I had Ruby Boots back in the day, all those years ago, it would have definitely made a big difference. And but yes, in having those conversations is how we know who needs the support, when and where. And if they're not being had, I'm not going to know.
So there's a real theme coming through all of the speakers today, isn't there, about data, about evidence of need, and most particularly around raising awareness of why these young people have such unique needs and why we need to meet them. So that's really helpful. Thanks, Heather. I think Jude's going to spotlight all of our panelists just now, and I'll just open it up to the floor if you'd like to ask some questions of any of the panelists today. I think that's all of them up and spotlighted now. If you just follow the usual Teams convention, raise your hand and we'll come to you. Lou, I don't know if you want to first up with the hand. I was going to say, Lou, I don't know if you want to come in with your the bit you wanted to offer, but no doubt you'll have a question as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. This has been incredibly helpful hearing from everybody. My notepad, as usual, is absolutely full of ideas, of thoughts, of things to reflect on. So thank you. To go back to what I thought might be helpful to mention when you were talking about what it might be like if you have two parents serving and one comes out. So I had direct experience with being involved with a family around maybe a professionals meeting, let's call it. And yeah, the father had come out, was medically discharged, PTSD, mental health issues, had an injury, significant injury. The mother was still serving. And actually, what you said today has really brought that home to me, because the impact on that child was huge, because he was scared of watching when his serving parent was heading off on a deployment or away on, even though her role wasn't around anything that would be concerning for him, he still thought in his head, she's going to come back the same as dad. She's going to suffer the same. And so it was just something when you were talking about dual parents, one coming out, and what that impact might be. I thought that might be quite useful to share, because it depends on the reasoning behind why that serving parent came out and how that impacts. And this certainly was having, or is having, quite an impact on that young child. So I thought I would just share that. It was relevant at the time, but maybe not now.
No, absolutely. I think there's a couple of really helpful things in that, Lou, isn't there? There's some bits around actually what is it like for that child anticipating when their mother stops serving, so they have already had a bit of an experience about what that transition looks like, and does that make it easier or harder, and how do we support that? And actually the other thing that I was struck when you were speaking, Jude and I uncovered some research recently from the States, but I still think relevant, that was saying that really the impact emotionally on children's well-being of deployment is actually no greater if they're being deployed to an area of conflict versus being deployed to something more administrative. For the child, that deployment is experienced in the same way. And I think your story of that young person really highlights that in a really real way, and we really need to be bearing that in mind. I think there's a sense that because we're no longer sort of, when Afghanistan was happening and it was very much within our consciousness and it was very much televised, there was a sense that children experience in deployment was this difficult thing, but children continue on a daily basis to experience deployment, and what we know is that continues to have an impact, just as children on a daily basis experience this transition into veteran status. And we also know that has an impact, but we need to understand what that is and how we better support that. So thank you, Lou, really helpful. Does anyone else have some questions they'd like to come in with for any of the panelists? Stevie, do you want to come on in?
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, absolutely fantastic today. Thank you so much. Everything struck a note with me, believe it or not, after 28 years in the military and coming out. My son was not too bad, but I actually recognise now my daughter suffered a little bit more. And I'm looking at, is there anything in place? I don't know whether this is maybe Susie could maybe answer this. I don't know. In the resettlement phase, is there any educational promise getting in there when you're coming through that phase before you come out that this might happen to families and their children? And a big question, because I didn't get it. I wasn't expecting it. As I say, yeah, it was more my daughter, that she was the youngest at the time, that actually suffered and went through CAMS and everything and didn't even think, to tell you the truth, of transition. Is that affecting her? Because we were just, me and the wife were just moving and a new life. Oh, we got to do this. I was just wondering, is there anything in that resettlement phase nowadays to prompt this?
Okay, thanks, Stevie. Sorry to hear about your daughter finding that tough at that time. So I would say not really. The transition support provided by the statutory support provided by Careers Transition Partnership is very much focused on careers first, employment first, and a little bit about sort of other connected areas like housing and finances, but it's very much still focused on training and employment, I would say. The new contract that started last October has a little bit more of a psychosocial element in it. So it does take, when people do their transition workshop, it does take people through a bit more about thinking of how this will affect, other members of their family and family relationships. So I think that's one area that has been improved. That contract hasn't been running for a year yet, so I don't think I've not seen any particular data around this, or I've not heard any particular evidence excuse me, about it making any kind of impact when it comes to this. So I think probably CTPs is very much still employment focused, and these other areas would still need to be that support's going to need to be introduced elsewhere. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, really, really helpful. Certainly, Stevie, it's something that we've been trying to have some conversations with at MOD policy makers, that things like the JSP 770, having some more direct questions inserted into that about children and young people and thinking about that. And that's definitely the aspiration of the Forces Children's Rights Charter, to be a vehicle by which we have, children and young people have spoken about what will make life better and different for them. And there are huge elements of that charter that talk particularly about that veteran status. And what we'd like to see is, more and more people pledging to uphold that charter, and for organisations to be thinking about how are they actively on the ground seeing that through. It's interesting, I've had both Jude and Heather ping me privately around some of their solutions here too. Jude has an aspiration for an e-learning module on all local authority platforms. We just need the cash to do that. And Heather very much looking for a resettlement pack, and that is included, so that actually as you go and see your welfare officer to start that preparation, and career advisors are about leaving, you get handed a welfare pack for your children and supported to do that. So I think that's something we really should be looking for. I'm really hopeful that the FIMPT research that we do will give us much more of a sense from children and young people about exactly what what would help them best, and we can see then the funding follow that research to make sure all those things are in place. So excellent question. Thanks, Stevie.
No, thank you.
Stephen, you had your hand up next. I'm conscious we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left of the scheduled meeting. If people could hang on, please do, but also completely respect that people might need to move on, and please do so. We will continue recording it so you can catch up with the bits that you missed if you need to get away, because we will post that after this. Sorry, Stephen, do you want to come in with your question?
Hey, hi. Just I'll be really quick. It was just a sort of an observation that that when you were talking about identity, it's something I'd never given a thought about with Forces Children. I'm travelling Scotland just now, speaking to all the veterans, trying to speak to every veteran in Scotland, and it's a huge thing. You know, as veterans, we like to wear badges, and I'd never gave it a thought. And just as the whole webinar's been going on, I wonder, and I don't know where you would get this information, but is there a like how many kids join up directly from, you know, because they're scared of losing that identity, so they come out for their Forces Children and their whole life's been in the forces, or like, so to speak, traveling. And you know, is there a link? You know, is there any information with that? And just, you know, congratulations to everybody on the present day. I've had the pleasure of having lunch with Heather's dad and Coco, so it was really good to see some photos. And but yeah, this has been really good, really good for me. So yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Susie, I as far as I'm aware, we don't really have those stats. I know traditionally Forces families tended to be the recruitment ground for more serving people, but I'm not sure we have stats to support that.
There's nothing published I'm aware of. I'm fairly sure it's asked. I used to be a recruiter, so it was certainly, you know, it was always asked if people had family connections, but I don't think it's a publicly published collected statistic. But it's a really interesting point, and you know, there's real strengths in that, and there are potential vulnerabilities as well in that, you know, Forces life passing through generations. But I think, you know, potentially there are kind of strengths in it as well. No, it's a really interesting point, but I don't think I've certainly never seen any of those statistics.
Thanks, Stephen. Heather, I think you had your hand up next.
Hi, I just want to say thank you very much. It really was extremely informative. I'm a Forces child myself. My dad, I think, was about 30-something years. What I'm particularly interested in is more literature around how it affects children in their later years. So sort of like from about 12, 13 plus. I know personally, I came back when I think it was 16, and we moved back from Germany. So it was quite a huge transition, because not only did the camp close, the camp closed, we all moved back, and then we were kind of turfed back into the UK. And I remember bawling my eyes out when we kind of did the Hamburg to Harwich trip, arriving in Harwich and basically saying, what have you done? I don't want to be here. So yeah, more literature, if there is any, if you could kind of guide me to the right place on the impact with older children, that would be fantastic, because I've got 2 cases at the moment, and they seem to be particularly struggling with the older children.
Yeah, Heather, we'll come back to that. There is unfortunately a lack. That's one of the things we absolutely need to build the evidence based. We're hoping that the FIMT research will help us do that. There has been a really interesting study released recently by Anne Chappell at Brunel University about growing up children, which touches on that experience of transition and times of transition. We will. Ali's already popped that. Thank you, Ali. That was seamless, popping that in the chat. And there is some research in an American context that you can make some assumptions will be transferable that we can also follow through. Susie, are you aware of any other specific ones that I've not covered?
I'm not sure. I think possibly Napier did some, because I think there was some research into Armed Forces children accessing further and higher education, and the percentage being a bit lower than the general population. But I would say the FIMT, if you want to look, the FIMT website is really good because it gathers all these things together, and it's searchable by search terms. So there's a really good resource there. Might have to do a little bit of searching about, but the published papers and their globally published papers are all kind of summarised and brought together in the FIMT website with their research website. So that'd be a good place to start.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah. The other thing I'm aware, UCAS did released some statistics last year that did say that forces children moving into that university context were more likely to have challenges around their mental health and well-being than their peers. So there is some research that suggests that it is more difficult at that age, but I'm not sure that there is a lot out there just now about quantifying that and looking at what those solutions might be. But I think when Jude follows up from this webinar, we can just pop some links to some of that interesting reading in that for everyone, so that if people want to explore the topic a little bit more, that we can, you've got an opportunity to do that. So Lou, you've got your hand up.
I have actually, and I just wondered who, and I think it's probably Jude I would follow up with. So thinking around adjusting and coping with change, with loss of coming out. So in Highland, we have a programme called Change, Loss, Bereavement. And we have specific trainers within Highland who deliver that programme from our primary mental health team at sites, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm wondering whether I might set up a conversation between ourselves. Jude, I think it's probably you I would approach, I think, because I think it would be brilliant if we've got that programme, but if we could be signposting that for when we know a family are transitioning out of the forces, that if it's got a lens as well around armed forces families, that could also be on offer, because it is all around change, loss and bereavement. But it's a conversation I'd like to follow up with you about, because I think if we've got something out there already, but we could also maybe put an armed forces lens on part of it. But also you will know of the national programme Seasons for Growth. And I didn't know whether that had come into your thoughts or wavelength about approaching Seasons for Growth, about maybe considering putting an armed forces lens, because that again is a programme which is around dealing with change and coping with change, etc. And it was just something that I thought might be helpful to mention.
Yeah, Lou, Seasons for Growth popped into my head at the start of the conversation. So we had our wellbeing worker in Queen Victoria's School trained in Seasons for Growth, and she was delivering that, but actually having conversations with them about adapting that to forces life and transition would be a really interesting prospect, a really interesting conversation.
Well, you're saying that. So our trainers for change, loss, bereavement, so our main trainer for that is also quite high up in the Seasons for Growth training programme for Seasons for Growth. So that conversation, if it was helpful, Jude, could be incorporated and you could explore that.
Excellent. Lou, I will let Jude follow that up with you. I think that that's an amazing thought to have.
I'll wait for your email, Jude. It will save me doing one. I'll wait for you to come to me.
I will definitely email you. on that point as well, just to make everyone aware, we offer a module on transition to civilian life where we cover a lot of what we've mentioned in the webinar today. So if you do have any other colleagues or anyone else that you feel would benefit from being informed about the transition, we do offer that as an in-person session, so we can deliver that in person, or we can do an online session as well, which just explores, what I mentioned at the start of the webinar about the before, during and after. And we touch upon, obviously, the Tornado of Change and the Ruby Boots project and the top tips that Nina mentioned. So there is a training module available there. I would love for it to be an e-learning module in every single authority across Scotland, but hopefully that will come one day when we have enough money. But it is in the pipeline, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So, but that module is there, that training module is available, which can be delivered. So if you are interested, I'll pop my email in the chat and you can get in touch with me about that.
Yeah. Also helpful to say that Max's Big Move, when it's released, will come with some learning resources identified that will help professionals support children is part of that. So we will have a range of resources. They'll probably be added to as they go, because there is only one of Jude, and as excellent as she is, there is only a limit to the amount of time that she has. So we would be building on that resource base as we go, but there will be resources attached to Max's big move. And thank you, Susie, for providing the forward for that. And actually, Sophia also provided a forward for that from her perspective. So we're really looking forward to that publication coming out. I think, thank you all for hanging on. I'm really conscious that many of you will need to leave. I'm just going to hand to Jude really, really quickly to flash up the evaluation code. If you could give us an evaluation, that would be really helpful. And the only thing that's left for me to then do is to just thank really sincerely Jude, Nina, Susie and Heather for their contributions today. It has been a real privilege for me to chair today. I think this is a topic that we need to have more conversations about. We need to raise more awareness. That's been really clear. And that data, actually understanding who these children are, how many they are, where they are, and how we need to support them, because not all of them will have the joy of being in Highland and having the excellent support that we've heard from Lou. And we know Murray has one of the biggest veteran populations by percentage in Scotland, but it shouldn't be a postcode lottery for these young people. And as we've already highlighted, these transitions will look different for the next generation of children coming through, because families are more dispersed and they will have different experiences. So we need to be thinking about how do we take this forward. So thank you very much yet again for joining us. We hope you'll see us at our next one. I can't remember the date. Jude, I'm sure we'll pop it in the chat.
Yeah.
But that one will be about exploring the concept of play in relation to Force's life, and some of the things that we've already heard about how safe it can be to play behind the wire, but some of the restrictions that might come with that, and how we can protect and promote children's right to play. So hopefully we will see you at that, but that's all for us today, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.